Only one, only one that you love. Only one, only one that you love. Only one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk. My name is Thomas Stanka. I'm from analogueNOW Photo Weekend. We are an biannual analog photography festival here in Berlin. And I brought you two sounds. This is a sound that you can remember. This is a sound you remember from your work or maybe your childhood. Nevertheless, for me, the sound is something I don't have to force myself to remember, because as a film photographer, this sound is something that constantly is a part of my everyday life. But I think for many, it is a sound of nostalgia, and I'm here today to give a brief introduction on what's up with film photography today. And my rundown is I want to start off with some facts and statistics, like every good speaker. I want to show who is shooting film and why are people shooting film, and the motives behind the decision to stay in film and to discover film are what I will try to explore further. What we will see is that subjectivity and the control of creation, the artistic control on the medium, will be a very important topic that I will try to give a more historical comparisons and background so that we can locate the contemporary film photography in a more larger scale of art history and photography history. And with my last point, I want to maybe foreshadow the near future of film photography and also want to address some issues from the community itself. Who shoots film and why? In 2018, the company Ilford Photo did a survey on this topic, and over almost 7,000 people participated in this survey. And this survey was conducted more in, let's say, a marketing environment, but it still shows and proves what other smaller studies or, let's say, hot tasks on film photography already suggested, that a large amount of film photographers only recently started picking up film photography and are otherwise demographically also below 30. So in this particular study, we can see that 24.2% of all participants said, I'm a new film shooter, and that means I used film for the first time in the last few years, which I think is an amazing figure to behold, because it shows that it's not just a growing community or a growing market, but that also means that we can get new people in our film photography community and new insights. Actually, the people who shoot film because they always shot film because they used to be professionals or photographers or amateurs is almost the minority if you look at it on a more international scale. So the community is quite young. That's basically what I want to say. And where does the community live? On the internet, like everybody else as a youngster. So the internet is flushing with film photography memes, and being a film photographer is to some people almost a meme itself. And shooting film, what I want to come to later, is not just a work or part of an exercise, it is more like a subculture itself. And as subculture itself, we are also referential to ourselves, and we like to indulge in ourselves a lot. Another question in the survey was actually a multiple response set asking why people chose film or why people shoot film. And the two largest numbers Ilford got as the response was the creative control and the aesthetics. With these two, let's say, main motivations why people pick up film or why people stay in film, I want to juggle around a bit. And there are many, many other aspects to film photography that I could talk about or give a whole lecture itself. But I want to focus today more on these two terms and also the notion of subjectivity and expression. And for that reason, I want to introduce you to artists I know from the Berlin photography scene. And on these examples, I want to explain what the urge to have creative control and the film aesthetics mean. First, I want to show you works of Enrique Freasa. He's a Spanish photographer living in Berlin. And these are two pictures from his series called Masks. As you can maybe already see, these are Polaroid pictures. He's a Polaroid photographer. And what he did is he asked people to sit portrait for him and think about a secret. And then he took the portrait. And later, he stitched with thread and needle a mask on top of their faces. So what I want to point out is that these pictures are not just pictures as a file or as a data. It is an object. What we talk about a lot in analog photography is we deal with artifacts. We deal with three-dimensional objects. And the materiality of our medium is a very important dimension in our work. And this is another prime example how an analog picture is being transformed by also analog means. We have a mechanical altering of these pictures, and this just talking about the theoretical, let's say, technical aspects. We have these pictures transformed by thread and needle to artifacts that are also unique. Those are, what I'm showing here is just a picture of a picture, but it's actually the artifact we have somewhere on display. And to the content of the series, the artist says that it's a take on identity. It's a take on how to construct identity in a social media environment. And I think this is already a good link to what I said about the film motivation to have a creative control over things and to express my subjective feelings or subjective art. And the subject of, okay, that's very self-referential, but the subject of subjectivity is a very big topic many artists deal with in film photography, and they love to express those interests and those self-explorative works through the material of film photography. A second, more abstract artist, Ria Wang, also based in Berlin, she is an expert on cameraless photography, which also is a huge part of the analog community. She uses chemicals on paper that is on photosensitive paper to create pictures. That means it is more a fringe-like area of photography, which means, like I said, there's no camera, no lens involved. It is just art. It is just light and chemistry combined. But as I will progress later in my presentation, I just want to summon those pictures again in your mind to give a small comparison to historical pictures from the pictorialist time and from subjektive Kunst, subjektive Fotografie from the 50s. The historical comparison is just a small and let's say a fast-paced catch-up on things I think are related to our contemporary analog photography. Like I said many times, I want to pinpoint this idea of subjectivity and the expression of oneself in film photography. And these ideas, the urge to express my subjective impressions, to express my feelings, is nothing new to art. It happened many times before. And also, it happened before in photography. And the first period, or first, almost I could say, a movement I can present to you is the pictorialism. Pictorialism around 1900 was a movement that was mainly based in amateur photography clubs in Europe, in the US, and the UK. And back then, the amateur was not a negative term. Photography amateurs were proud to be experimental, to be not bound to the laws, or let's say to the laws of the industry. And pictorialism, in general, is a photography that, in style and impression, is borrowing a lot of the visuals from painting, from impressionism. Just a small background information. In the 19th century, we still have a huge discussion about whether photography is art or not, whether photography is just a technical instrument or an expression of artistic creation. And the pictorialists, they proved everyone that photography can be art through subjective alteration of photography. And what they did was, in their understanding, photography is something that you have to bend to your will. Photography is something where you have to engage with the techniques to create a subjective and unique expression. That means they were masters in many different printing techniques. They used different palladium or gold or rubber printing techniques that in the end would create pictures that to the unknown eye may just look very thickly varnished or just faded away over time. Here we have an example, the young Edward Steichen, the Pond from 1898. Back then, he was very much into pictorialist art and also one of the driving forces in the US. And I want to, like I said, I want to summon the images from Ria Wang I showed you just seconds ago to compare them to the picture by Steichen. Of course, it's a different technique, it's a different time, it is a different purpose. But what I want to say, what I want to show with this picture is that the pictorialists were not so much interested in taking pictures of reality or taking pictures from the world. They were interested in creating pictures. They wanted to express their impression of nature, most of all, to express their feelings of loneliness, of solitude, also of tranquility in their art. So the uniqueness of the process is also almost a fringe phenomena in photography, that the idea of the always printable, always reproducible picture is not a common thing in pictorialism. Looking at my time, I want to progress to the next slide. Subjektive Fotografie, a style and almost a school from the 1950s, origin in Germany, mostly driven by Otto Steinert and the art historian Josef Adolf Schmoll. Steinert was a photographer, a young photographer in the late 40s. After World War II, the German Photography Society was viewed by many young photographers as being too conservative, too traditional, too much focused on the perfect picture. And Steinert and his, I can almost say, complices created a new movement in photography, which later formed the name of subjektive Fotografie. And subjektive Fotografie, as the name already suggests, subjective photography, is driven by the artist's mind. Subjective photographers are also not interested in taking pictures of facts or producing pictures for press. They tried to put themselves in a larger tradition or a larger heritage of the modernist photographers in the 20s. Most of all, Molinox as the prime example of photograms with Man Ray together. So they borrowed, or let's say in their understanding, they improved the techniques from the 20s and 30s. But I could talk a lot about this probably later. They wanted to, what they wanted is, they took a different turn. They took the techniques from the 20s and used them for their own notion of subjective expression. And for me as a researcher, it's a blessing that Josef Adolf Schmoll, as an art historian, was involved in this movement, because he very clearly stated the ideas of said movement. And in this longer quote that I don't really have to read out, he says that the photographer is utilizing the world and the surroundings just as objects, just as things. The most important thing is the reflection of the subject, of the artist in those things. Like he said in German, die Gegenstände sind nur Gegenstand. The objects are just there for him to grab, there for him to produce his art. One work by Steinert from '52. Like I said, they used techniques and utilized techniques from the 20s and created pictures that also, in their understanding, were just unique expressions of their artistic approach. But their range of photography was not just limited to these more experimental techniques. It was also that they wanted to open photography as an expression of oneself, to have a lower threshold to express creation or contemplation. There are also other examples showing a more social documentary style of photography, but for my presentation I wanted to focus on the more experimental kind. Okay, now I feel like I have to put all the threads I laid out here together and to try to make it a sum. I talked about that people want to shoot analog photography because they like the aesthetics, they like the feeling of being in control, but they also like a little bit the randomness. Because in analog photography, you're never alone. You always have the factor X that is like chemicals, that is physics, and sometimes just pure coincidence. So analog photography is always a play between gaining control and losing control. And for many photographers, many artists, the ultimate goal is to master the technique only to later then be able to let go of the control. And in my understanding, a lot of contemporary analog photography, also the exhibitions we did during this weekend now, show bodies of work that somehow fit in these main categories of a play on control and a play on expressing oneself. But subjectivity, like I said, a big topic in analog photography, but another topic that always comes with subjectivity is, I would say, the overload of subjectivity. Everybody is a subject anyways. What is so special about one certain artist? What is so special about my approach on experimental photography? And this is also something that the pictorialists had to deal with, and this is also something subjektive Fotografie had to deal with. Because at some point it just gets too much. Everybody is just too far away from each other, and you can't really talk about the works because it's always, in the end, just an expression of art. So this phenomena, how to approach this, I got you three more memes from the internet. Like I said, the big community online talking about film photography, and there are so many self-referential jokes on ourselves because the vibes, we always talk about the vibes, about the aesthetics. And the thing is that with social media and comparing so many works together, we at some point go to a point that film photography looks a lot like it's always the same. And the pictures I have for you are collections of an Instagram account that collect film photography that looks the same and puts them together. But it doesn't have to be old-timer cars or gas stations. It can also be experimental photography. So what is the problem when all the pictures are so subjective and everybody is such a great individual artists themselves that in the end the pictures look the same. How to approach this fact. I think as an art historian, film photography is going through a very important phase, a very important development for the near future. And that is, first of all, the experiencing, it is the exploring. And like maybe subjektive Fotografie in the 50s, we try a lot techniques that have been done before. We do a lot of things that look like Otto Steinert or Edward Steichen, but we are a new generation. We are young people. I'm 26 years old. My first time shooting film was as a kid, but then later seriously shooting film only some, I think, 6 years ago. So we are a totally new generation that first of all has to explore what is there, has to explore what is possible in film photography. And for this, we need support in our community, but also externally. Because we are young, we can't do many things, we have to learn a lot, we want to learn a lot. And that's why also, like my association, analogueNOW, we try to bring the old masters of darkroom printing, of camera repairmanship, of photography together with the young people who are very eager to learn, who are like sponges. They want to soak up all the knowledge and experience before it's too late, before this knowledge is lost. And this is the biggest issue we're going to tackle in the coming years. From the time of exploring, from the time of rediscovering film photography, to the time of sustaining it. And this is also, in my opinion, our main job as analogueNOW or as film shooters everywhere on the world, to sustain our art and to sustain our techniques. Later, I will be in our booth here outside, just at Haubentaucher. If you want to come by and have a chat about photography or just, I don't know, take a look at my cameras maybe, you can come by. And otherwise, it was a pleasure talking in front of you, and thank you very much.